Namaste, colleagues. I'm Ormond Simpson. I've been working in distance and online education for more than 40 years, much of that time with the UK Open University, but I've also visited more than 17 different countries to give presentations and do workshops. And this year alone, I've written 3 chapters for different books. And in a couple of weeks' time, I will be giving another presentation to an online university in South Korea. I've got a website, www.ormondsimpson.com, where you find hopefully many free articles, presentations, and other things, which I hope you will find useful. But this is a very special honor to be able to address you at the beginning of this most important conference of the Nepal Open University. This conference on online education is especially important because the world has so many problems at the moment. There's the pandemic. We must hope that new vaccines are on the way and will work well, but there'll always be another virus to come. By the way, I have used the facility of the internet in Google Translate to translate some of the headings in my presentation into Nepali. Like many things on the internet, these translations may not be accurate, so do please ignore them if they're not helpful. Another very serious problem is global warming, or global heating, as it should really be called. This is perhaps the most serious problem we have at the moment, with devastating consequences for the entire world, and especially for developing countries. Then there's pollution, both atmospheric pollution and plastic pollution. Atmospheric pollution is already killing thousands of people every year around the world, and plastic pollution is clogging up our seas with dreadful effects on marine animals and fish. Then there's species extinction. Many kinds of animals and insects and fish are becoming extinct, and we don't know what the consequences of that will be. I believe that Nepal is doing much better in terms of species extinction than many countries. But perhaps worse than that problem are the ongoing wars in so many parts of the world. Even as I speak today, there are tensions between China and India, which could have grave consequences for the world if it turns into outright conflict. Finally, and above all, and underlying many of these problems, is the issue of poverty and social injustice. So many of the world's people live in desperate circumstances and are treated very badly, especially the children. So how can we start to try and solve all these problems? Is there a solution? Well, many years ago, the English author H.G. Wells said that civilization is in a race between education and catastrophe. So Is education the answer to the world's problems? Was Wells right to believe that education could help us solve these problems? Well, I believe that he could be. But we know that there are many problems with conventional face-to-face education. It's expensive and it's exclusive and keeps most people out. Many people, especially poor people, cannot access it. So is there a way to make education more affordable and more accessible? Well, we now have the internet. So is online education the answer? After all, the internet enables us to do many incredible things, like allowing me to speak to you all the way from Britain. And of course, it can be used for education. So is online education the answer to making education available to everyone? Well, there are still problems. Online education may well be part of the answer, but we still have some difficulties. Access to online education is still limited and it's still costly, as it needs expensive equipment and networks. Although these costs are coming down, and the advent of mobile phones has made a huge difference. But at the moment, the evidence is that the internet is making the difference between rich and poor actually worse than before. That needs to change. And there is another problem. At the moment, much online education is ineffective, with very high levels of dropout from online courses. Up to 80% or even 90% of online students can drop out of their courses, even in technically advanced countries like the UK. So, can we overcome these problems? Well, I think there may be an answer. If we take the very best of online education and the best of face-to-face education and put them together, we may have the answer. This is blended learning. How can we blend our learning? Well, remember that there are three parts to online education. There's the educational texts that have to be learnt in any course. These are the textbooks or the online course texts that are the basis for the material that has to be learnt. And then there's the teaching and support media. That's the teaching and support that is given to students in different ways, face-to-face in a classroom or over the internet in online education. And then, most importantly, there are the people like yourself who actually give that teaching and support. Not just the teachers, but the support staff, the administrators, and everyone who works in an online university. To use blended learning, you need to combine these three elements in different ways according to what works best in your environment. For example, for the educational text, you could use books or e-books sent by mail. The teaching could then be by mobile phone or tablet or PC and carried out by full-time university teachers. Last year, I was teaching at the Open University of Sri Lanka, which uses these methods. Or you could put the teaching materials on a website such as Moodle for students to download or read online, and then send teaching and support by email, perhaps using local part-time tutors, as the UK Open University does. Or you could even use radio and television, like the Open University of Mauritius. And don't forget that other students can help with teaching and support, either as mentors, that is, senior students helping newer students, or as study friends working together to learn. And we have found in the UK that families and employers of students can be very helpful in supporting their students if you tell them how. Or, of course, you can combine these things in different ways, such as sending educational text by email to tablets and PCs, and then use local part-time tutors. And there are other combinations and ways of organizing teaching and support which depend on your particular environment. But however you organize your online education, I think that there are three underlying principles which are vitally important. I think of them as the 3 Ps. These Ps are, number one, to point at the whole student. Number two, to be proactive. And number three, to personalize. Let me explain what I mean by each of these in turn. Think of a distance student as having 3 brains, all rolled into one brain. There's their reasoning brain. That's their intellect, the part that studies and learns. Then there's their emotional brain, the part that feels emotions such as happiness, learning motivation, and anxiety. Then there's their organizational brain, the part that organizes and manages their life and the things around them, such as their study time, their learning, their work, and their family. To teach students well, you need to point your teaching and support to all 3 brains, not just their learning, reasoning brain. You need to point your teaching at the student's reasoning brain to reach their intellect and help them learn. You need to point your emotional support at the student's emotional brain and help them deal with the emotional feelings of being a student, help them with their motivation to learn, help them to have the courage to ask questions and to deal with study anxiety, especially, of course, at exam times. You need also to point your support at the student's organizational brain in order to help them manage their studies and their time, to deal with the administrative parts of the course and how to fit their studies in with their family and their job demands. The next thing of my P's is proactive. Student support can be reactive, waiting for students to contact you for help. Or it can be proactive. This means that you take the initiative to reach and contact students before they contact you. Proactive contact and support is much more effective in teaching and supporting students because students who need the help the most make contact the least. Many students lack the courage to ask for help and then they drop out. Finally, the third thing is to personalize, to be personal with students as much as you can. Try to see your students as individuals and make personal contact with them. You learn best when there is someone in your life who cares that you learn. That's particularly important in online education, where students and teachers may never meet face to face. So it needs a very particular effort. So here's my 3P model. You must point at the student's three brains, the reasoning, emotional, and organizational brain. You should be proactive in contacting them, not waiting for them to contact you. And you should be personal, making them feel that you care about them personally. Let's have a few examples of what students say about this. This student said, "My tutor was so enthusiastic that she always kept me motivated to learn." So this was support pointed at the motivational part of the emotional brain. This student said, "When I got ill, the university rescheduled my studies for me." So this was support pointed at the organizational brain. This student told me, "I was about to drop out when someone called me from the university. So I got going again." So this was proactive support. So this was an example where proactive support worked and kept a student going when they might otherwise have dropped out. And finally, this student said, "I always felt that people at the university knew who I was. It was a great help." So that's an example of the importance of personal support. So these are just examples of the importance of how we should teach and support our online students. But in the end, you must make the decision about what works best in the particular conditions at the Open University of Nepal. These are just thoughts to help you think about that. But as well as how we should teach our students, I think we should also ask about what we should teach them. Now, we all teach different subjects, but I think there's one thing that I think we should all teach. Let me explain. I started this presentation by suggesting that education could indeed help save civilization. But for that to happen, there's one very important thing we need to teach our students. What might that be? Well, the British philosopher Lord Bertrand Russell once said that many people would rather die than think, and sometimes do. I think that it's people not really thinking properly that causes many of the problems that we face in the world. Or let me put it in another way that's rather more modern, perhaps. We need to teach our students to think and judge evidence. The economist Daniel Kahnemann, who won the Nobel Prize a little while ago, is the author of a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. He says that we all have two ways of thinking. There's our system one thinking, which is fast and instinctive and usually ignores evidence. Or there's our system two thinking, which is slow, analytical, and uses evidence. Now, we need both types of thinking, Kahnemann says. If you were to walk through the mountains and bump into a tiger, then your system one thinking will react instinctively and immediately so you can run away and survive, we hope. Your system two thinking is no use to you because you will think too long, wonder about the evidence, and you could end up getting eaten. But when it comes to more complex things, like the COVID virus, then people who only think with system one will say instinctively, without looking at the evidence, that vaccines are fake news and they may well die. Whereas people thinking with their system two brains will say, well, let's look at the evidence. There's evidence that vaccines work and they will probably live. So we need both types of thinking But I think that most people usually use system one thinking, and that is the cause of many of the world's problems, because they just use their instinct and they ignore evidence, which is why a lot of people ignore global heating, for example. And it affects especially people who've not had the benefit of higher education. So if we are to help deal with all the world's problems, we must help people learn to use system two thinking, to think and to use evidence. System two thinking will help us avoid all the fake news that is around us, and especially on the internet. So whatever subjects we are teaching, we must always teach our students how to think and how to judge evidence properly. Well, I'm nearly at the end of my presentation. I hope you found it interesting and helpful, but I also hope that you will be thinking and asking what evidence I have for everything I've said. Well, you will find some of that evidence in my book, Supporting Students for Success in Online and Distance Education. But you may also find some useful articles, presentations and book chapters on my website, www.ormondsimpson.com. And all those things there are completely free. But my last message is a very simple one. If we really want to shape a humane world, then teachers like us have a great responsibility. For the sakes of all our children all around the world, we must teach them to think and judge evidence. Thank you very much for listening, colleagues. Good luck for the conference. I hope it goes really well, and my warmest wishes go with you. Thank you for listening.